Hey, Joe Gilder here. In my last video, I talked about how to use big, huge reverbs in your mix without it ruining everything. And I got this same question over and over again in the comments, so here I am to answer it. The question is, Joe, how did you get reverb on just one word of the vocal? Going to answer that in today's video. I also have a free gift for you, but first, let me briefly show you the right way to set up a reverb in a mix session. I know people get all bent out of shape when I say this is the right way, but this is the best way to do it. So here's my vocal track, okay? This vocal track is feeding this vocal bus. The blue one is a bus. So you can just assume that what we're looking at here, this is my vocal track, okay? This is the vocal that we're hearing right here. That needs some reverb. How do we do it? A lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with this, will think to just put the reverb right here on the channel itself. They'll grab a reverb plugin, they'll drag it into the plugin chain along with things like compressors and EQs, and then they'll do something like this. They'll set the mix knob to something like this and say, I have reverb. That's true, but did you hear that? This is one of the main reasons why I don't do reverb like this. Listen to how muddy this reverb sound is. You hear that? That woo, 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 woo. That's just something the reverb does. Lots of reverbs do this. And guess what? There's no way to EQ that out this way. Some reverbs have EQ on them, that's fine, but I can't get rid of that muddiness this way. The only way to get rid of the muddiness is to have the reverb on its own channel, which is what I have here. You've kind of already seen it. So instead of putting the reverb on the vocal, I've got an auxiliary channel or an effects channel with the reverb on it. Here's the reverb, and the very next thing in the chain is this EQ that gets rid of all the low-end boominess. Now, how do I get the vocal to this reverb? I simply come over here under the send section of the vocal, and I say, let's find audio destinations, and let's send this to this plate reverb that I have set up here. Then I can just turn this up and down based on how much reverb I want on this vocal. And now the vocal is here, and the reverb is here, and they're separated, and it's all glorious. There's another reason you want to set up reverb this way. Let's say I have multiple vocals and I want them to all have some reverb on them. If I put the reverb on the individual vocal track, that means I'm going to have multiple reverb plugins on each vocal. If I have 10 background vocals, that's 10 reverb plugins. That's ridiculous. And if I want to change the reverb sound, I've got to change it on each individual. Nobody has time for that. Put the reverb on its own bus and then just send what you want to it. This way, I can send this vocal to this reverb. I can send this cool ambient guitar to this reverb. I can send a little bit of the piano to this same reverb. One reverb plugin used multiple different ways. By the way, if you've watched some of my videos and one of the following is true, you're not happy with your mixes or you feel like your mixes have no sense of direction and purpose, you're kind of randomly spinning your wheels, I want to give you a free gift. It's called my 5-step mix guide. You can download it for free. It will transform your mixes. Go to 5stepmix.com to get your free copy. Okay, so now we have reverb on our vocal, but let's say we don't want reverb on the entire vocal, we just want it on one phrase. How do we do that? Well, one option is to just stand here and click this little on-off button on the reverb send here. So I'm turning on or off that send that's sending a copy of the vocal to the reverb. So I can do that here. Oh, their lies, they're not some. Mission accomplished. But of course, I'm not going to sit and click this every time. There must be a way to, here's the magic word, automate that click. If you're not familiar with the phrase automation, automation is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's what makes factories work, but it's also what makes mixes work, because we can automate, we can tell the computer to do something for us so we don't have to manually do it. You've probably heard of automation when it comes to volume faders. We can automate the fader to move up and down throughout the song automatically so we don't have to do it over and over. Well, guess what? You can do that with all kinds of things inside of a mix, one of those being this send right here. This button is called the send mute. If I turn it off, that send is muted, and we can automate that. Now, every system, every software has a different way of doing automation. In Studio One, which is what I use, it's really quite simple. Who says quite simple? I do. You hover your mouse over the parameter you want to adjust. Right-click, and then just choose Edit Automation. And it tells you what that automation is called. This specific type of automation is called the send mute. And as soon as I click that, you'll notice something changed up here. This new track appeared on my vocal bus that has this horizontal line. This is an automation lane that I can click on and make changes to. So I want to add the reverb to this phrase right here. So just to the word lies. So the L starts right here, let's say. So I just click on this little horizontal line, and then I click over here a second time and just drag it down. So this is like a binary on-off switch. So now this means it's off, 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 and when it goes down, it's going to be on. And then when that word is over, if that's the only word I want, I just click a couple of times, drag the second one up, and now I've got it set to where this looks almost like a binary square wave light switch. The switch goes on here and goes back off there. Let's see if that works. If I did this correctly, we should hear the reverb come on just for that phrase, and we should also see the mute button come on and off by itself auto-magically. Let's check it out. Their lies, they're not something. Mission accomplished. And the best thing is we can still adjust the amount of reverb here. Let's say we thought that was a little bit much. We can adjust that to our heart's content without messing with that existing automation. Now, if I want this to happen every time I sing that line, this is the first line of a chorus, I have to go through and find that section for each of the choruses of the song. So this will take a couple of minutes to go, or a couple of seconds to go set up. But once it's done, it's going to follow that automation forever. Super fast bonus tip. I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can do this if you, for whatever reason, don't want to do it the way that I showed you and don't want to use automation. One of those is I'll put a reverb on this directly on this vocal track instead of on the bus. And the reason for that is I can now turn that reverb off. And what I can do is duplicate this vocal track. So I'm going to right click, duplicate the track. It's going to duplicate all the settings except for the audio. So now I have two copies of the same track, one with the audio and one without. Then I can go find whatever phrases I want to have reverb on them. I can drag them down, which basically copies and pastes them down to a different track. And then I can turn the reverb on that second track. The net result is the same. Only now I can visually see where the reverb's happening when I'm not maybe looking at the volume or the mute automation. I don't like this approach because it gives me an extra track to work with. Also, you're duplicating things like EQs and compressors depending on how you have your mix set up. Here's another way to do this. I never do it this way, but it's worth noting. If I double click on the top section of this, it turns this into its own little section of audio. We can even change the color here so you can see it. We can actually apply an effect to this little chunk of audio. It's called different things. It's called, I think, Audio Suite in Pro Tools. It's called Event Effects in Studio One. So this just means when I turn that on, I can literally add a plugin to just this little chunk of audio. So if I wanted to add some sort of a reverb, I could do it like this. Technically accomplish the same thing, but you run into the problem I said at the beginning. This puts that plugin on the audio, which means I can no longer really EQ this reverb. I'm having to adjust the mix knob. That's no good. By the way, speaking of mix knob, when you set up your reverb the way I showed you, where you put it on its own bus, you want to make sure that the mix knob is set to 100% because I want to have all my reverb on that channel, all my dry vocal on the other. All right, that wraps up this video. If you're hungry for more about reverb, I made a video called The 5 Rules of Reverb. You can check that out here. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.